Hi, my name is Fuad Sharif. I'm the Vice President at Crescent Air Freight. We are an international logistics services provider. We focus on air and ocean freight forwarding services for U.S. importers and exporters. And I want to thank you for downloading our webinar today on the service benefit and cost, price, and value in the logistics process. Now, the service benefit is a concept that we have created at Crescent Air Freight. Typically, we'll see companies focused on cost-benefit analyses, and their decision-making becomes very price-driven. With the service benefit concept, we take the approach that superior service delivers true, measurable savings to customers above and beyond price itself. In detailing this concept, we have a series of webinars in which we quantify the true cost of logistics. We're also going to be explaining the fundamental difference in the small versus large logistics providers business model and what that actually means for customers, how customers can extract greater value from the small logistics providers model. And then lastly, we're going to be defining and explaining in this webinar and in future ones service and the benefits it actually brings to a customer supply chain. We're going to try to actually put some numbers to the intangible concept of service. We're also going to try to explain and define what service really is and what it really means to your international business in greater detail. This current webinar that you're watching focuses on cost, price, and value in the logistics process. We have looked here at the results of 3 logistics decisions that were made almost exclusively on the basis of price. All shipments were large, they were urgent, and they were by air, and all shippers were Fortune 500 companies. Now, even though we're talking about Fortune 500 companies, this is very relevant to the supply chain needs of small and mid-sized companies as well. As you'll see in the following cases, price was the main determinant. Now, many of our smaller and mid-sized customers will often say that they don't have the resources or the budgets that their larger global competitors do, which is absolutely true. We do understand that. But as you'll see from these cases, even large companies, large organizations have budgets. They have to meet them. They have to be within certain revenue and expenditure targets, and they also are very price driven. Now, our first case, number 1, it's called All Wet. And here our customer, a Fortune 100 company and a longtime customer of ours, went out for bid on a 30-ton air freight shipment from New York to Tokyo. The commodity was cigarettes, a consumable, and the reason they went out for bid in this particular case is they were required to do so in order to meet their annual internal audit process requirements. And those of you who are at large companies are familiar with this. Even in the mid-sized market, you'll see it very often. Auditors come in and they make sure that your procurement activity is collecting 3 or 4 quotes, that your activity is then awarding the business to the lowest price or the best combination of price and quality service provider. It can be a very irritating process for our customers. We know that on a personnel level, it's not the most pleasant thing to do, to disrupt a working relationship for audit. But that's what went into this particular case. Now, the shipment was awarded to our competitor who used a low-price airline. Their winning bid was 5 cents a kilo cheaper than ours. As we mentioned, this was 30,000 kilos worth of product, so there was a pretty significant cost savings to be realized by using the low price option in this case. The net savings to the client on this job was $1,500. That was a clear, measurable number that they could report back to their audit group and to their senior management and show that they had actually achieved some kind of saving based on choosing the low price option. Now, if price was the only issue, the matter is closed, the customer got their savings. But generally, in business, things are never quite that simple. And in this case, we found that the low-cost carrier was unfamiliar with the specific handling needs of this commodity. These are cigarettes. And they're not perishable, but they're also not durable, and they are vulnerable to theft in the transit process. and the low-cost carrier was simply not prepared to meet any of those contingencies. More importantly, the low-cost carrier was not very familiar with the demands of product and packaging care required in Japan. For those of you who do business with the Japanese market, you're familiar with this. They are a customer that do not want so much as a single crease or dent in the outer packaging of their freight. Now, this is not them being finicky, or this is not them being difficult. It's not a cultural discrepancy or problem. The issue is with Japan that you're dealing with a highly space-constrained market, so they don't have the space for irregular freight. They need things to stack cleanly, neatly, and fit in their warehouses. It's also a market where there are very high labor costs. So damaged, dented, any freight that needs special attention or manual handling drives up cost, and they don't want that. So they're very particular about how their freight comes in. And both of these cases, both of the points in this slide, are classic knowledge elements of the service benefit. If you have the market knowledge, you can address problems before they come up and improve the service that your customer is going to receive, and that's precisely what we do. Now, in this case, what happened was that the low-cost carrier failed to secure the cargo in the manner that Crescent and our preferred carriers normally do. The freight was left out on the rain, on the airport loading ramp, without proper plastic wrap protection and cardboard corners. As I mentioned, these are cigarettes. They don't do very well when they're wet, and it's not a durable product. There is a standard operating procedure that we had and continue to have in place with our vendors for handling this kind of cargo. 4 days later, the client calls me. No bid this time. They need to ship 7 tons of packing material in order to repack the cargo in Japan due to the damages caused by the low-cost option. We're talking about plain cardboard, paper, and foil, 7 tons of it that had to get flown out in order to correct the problem that arose from the bad logistics choice that came with the lowest price option. Now, looking at the numbers on this case, you can see that we quoted $1.20 a kilo. 30,000 kilos was the weight of the shipment, so we offered the customer a price of $36,000. Our competitors were at $1.15 a kilo, 5 cents a kilo cheaper on the same weight, so they came up with a savings for the client of $1,500. The client was able to report this back to their audit group, and under perfect circumstances, the exercise would have gone great. They would have saved $1,500, increased their profit on that order, except for the cost of bad logistics, which is what we take a look at in our next slide. Now, because the product was damaged because of bad handling, there was a cost of shipping replacement empty packaging to Japan through Crescent Air Freight. We got the customer a great rate of $1.25 a kilo on 7 tons, so the customer winds up taking a expense item of $8,750 to fix the product and repack the product that got to Japan and was damaged. So they can keep their $1,500 saving, which we have here. We'll give it to them, but they also incurred this cost of $8,750, which they had to pay in order to realize the $1,500 saving. What that amounts to is a cost overrun of $7,250 on this job. That's a direct impact to the order profitability. Now, in some cases, if it's an industry where you don't have these kinds of pricing margins, that could wipe out your entire profit on the job. In the case of this client, it didn't wipe out the profit, but it's still a substantial hit to the profit that they could have made on the job. Now, in the previous slide, we had laid out the case for what our customer lost because of bad logistics. We had hard numbers to show. There's also some hidden costs as well, which are very important. You have the cost of repacking goods in Japan. Now, somebody knows this cost. It was not revealed to us, and our contacts at the logistics group would not have known it because it was probably assigned to a different part of the organization. But the customer had to pay labor in Japan, one of the more expensive labor markets in the world, to to manually unpack their product, dry it out, dispose of it, and repack it, and so on. That's a direct charge to the profitability of the order. Then there's lost sales due to delayed delivery of product in the market. And this is significant. It's a consumable. If it's not on the store shelves, the buyer will buy somebody else's competing product. If you're not selling along those same lines, then you're also not pulling in the cash. So now you've got something which has a negative impact to company cash flow, and that has several other implications to it which your finance and accounting people would be aware of. Then you've got product loss, net of insurance reimbursement. So let's say there was a deductible. A certain amount of product was simply destroyed and wiped out, and nobody's getting reimbursed for it. Even if you had 100% coverage on this, you still have at least a couple of people in the organization who have to go back, do the numbers and applications for the insurance adjustment or refund. That's a classic case of time is money. People taking time out of their daily work to have to go back and get a reimbursement for something that could have been completely avoided. Now, as logistics people, I want to make an interesting point here. It would do you a lot of good from a career perspective and from a job performance perspective to go out in your organization and try to learn more about these hidden costs. Have a conversation with your colleague in marketing and find out what impact delayed or lack of product in a market has on the brand, the corporate brand. Have a conversation with one of your colleagues in finance and ask them what it means to have a negative cash flow event and what impact delayed sales or delayed deliveries have on companies' cash flow. If you can reach up even higher, maybe have a CFO level conversation, do that and talk to them about the impact of product delays or lack of sales due to missed deliveries or damaged or compromised goods, and what does that mean for the company's overall profitability. At the very least, this information will help you a good deal in understanding your vendor selection process. And it's also likely to show to your colleagues and bosses that you do see the big picture and that you are not simply confining your job to moving goods from A to B at the lowest price. Now, our next case, case number 2, I call Take Your Vitamins. It involved an overseas customer of a global leader in the nutrition, vitamin, and supplements business, and they had asked us to handle an air freight project of about 47 tons by air from Salt Lake City, Utah to Dubai. It was decided that the job would be broken up into 2 shipments. And due to a lack of capacity at nearby airports in the Salt Lake vicinity, we concluded very early on that we were going to have to move this product out of either Los Angeles or somewhere on the US West Coast, or bring it all the way out to the US East Coast. Now, the first shipment was 18 tons, and Crescent took care of it from start to finish. We used our own chosen truckers and our preferred airlines to do the job. This is significant. We have relationships in the industry going back over 35 years, and we know which carriers do the best job with our customer goods. Customer entrusted us, and we took care of the origin trucking. We decided to go to Los Angeles with the freight, and we had our preferred carrier in Los Angeles work on a flight plan. And they came back to us and said, we'll take the freight from you in Los Angeles, but looking at our load factor and our bookings for the week ahead, we feel more comfortable flying this cargo out of Seattle. So we'll move it at our own cost from LA to Seattle for you. Now, before we agreed to that, we had them put together a complete flight plan. And they told us right down to the last skid how many pieces they were moving on each flight, on which days of the week, and when our customer was going to have that product in Dubai. And only after they gave us that plan did we agree to go ahead and do it that way and give them the product in LA and have them move it onwards. And with that kind of concerted planning and vendor coordination and participation in the process, this first batch of 18 tons moved to Dubai in 7 days. So you had a total transit time of 7 days door to destination, and that included a substantial amount of trucking within the United States. So the job really went extremely well. Now, when the second shipment came around, it was 29 tons. The customer insisted that we use a low-price carrier whose rate was 30 cents a kilo cheaper than the carrier we had used for the first shipment. So clearly the customer had gone out here and done some shopping, probably obtained some competitive bids, or maybe somebody else in the market got wind of the project and it came at the customer with a very aggressive offer, and they wanted us to come up with a rate match. They still wanted us to handle the job, they wanted our service, but they wanted a different airline. When we had done the initial quote, we gave them two options, our preferred carrier, and we also gave them a second preferred carrier who was about 15 cents a kilo cheaper and still would have done an extremely good job of handling the product. The customer wouldn't accept that either. They wanted us to go with the lowest price option for the balance of the freight. Now, what's interesting here is the low price carrier is also one of our vendors. We simply left them out of the consideration for this project because we're familiar with their ground handling and with some of their flight schedules and capacities, and we didn't think they'd be a good fit for this freight. That was all. But the customer insisted that we work with them. So the customer's insistence against our advice got us to move this cargo with the cheapest of the three airlines. This airline was so enthusiastic about getting the business that they even threw in the cost of trucking. So they came up with a sweet deal. We don't begrudge them that. They wanted to be competitive. They went and got very aggressive, and they came up with a very strong price proposition in support of this business. Now, within a very short period of time, the price-based decision began to unravel. And what we found out was that 11% of the cargo was actually misplaced inside the airport warehouse of the low-price carrier. It was actually at Washington Airport, and that's an airport that is quite well known for its ground handling troubles. The cargo, despite being in their warehouse, was unaccounted for by the airline for 1 month. Now, we heard back from our customer within about a week of arrival, and there was clearly some mismatch in the tallies. But when we checked with the shipper, there was no product left behind, there was no product at the destination airport, and that's a pretty easy one to figure out. If it's not where it's supposed to be and it's not where it came from, it's usually at the warehouse in the middle, which in this case was the airport. We requested a search of that airport warehouse very early on, and the search produced nothing. And it was only when we requested a second search that the balance of the freight was located in a separate area of the airport warehouse in Washington. Now let's take a look at the numbers on this case. Our preferred carrier, who did a great job with the first 18 tons, wanted to handle these 29 tons for $76,270. Our second preferred carrier, who we also would have felt very comfortable with in terms of service levels, was willing to do the job for $70,470. So we've got almost $6,000 in savings and still a very, very high level of service for our customer. The choice the customer made, purely on the basis of price, was $67,570. So the customer is realizing a savings here of almost $9,000, and we don't blame them. This is a pretty compelling savings argument. But we want to be very clear here. We don't begrudge any customer the desire to save money. You should. But price is only one component of cost. And so, when you do the analysis, the simple question comes, did they really save any money by choosing the lowest price option? Now, we took a look at the numbers in the previous slide, and we're left with this question of, did they really save any money? Now, the first thing you want to consider there is the value of the misplaced cargo. It was $500,000. Now, it was eventually recovered, but ask yourself this: irrespective of your title or designation in your company, can you actually get in front of a boss or a client or a colleague and say, I have no clue where $500,000 went? It's a very serious matter for the company. Now, you've got your hidden costs of bad logistics. Missed sales due to late delivery. Again, the product didn't get there. The buyer could not advance the product in the market. They could not sell. They could not recover any revenue or profit or cash from this job. There's the delayed order to cash realization, which is really extending or expanding upon the point above, but an issue that you want to know about. If you're in a big organization, you're more familiar with this. Those of you who are in smaller organizations may not have encountered it, but large global businesses actually hire specialists and entire teams to look at their order to cash process. They are studying every aspect of the transaction from order till the time it gets paid and looking for ways to improve it and make it more effective. And here you had a massive order to cash realization problem. Then you've got the negative impact on the customer's cash flow. This is twofold. Number one, the lack of product. $500,000 of their goods never got to them, they never sold. But this is even further aggravated by the fact that the customer paid for all the goods in advance of departure. So they were completely out of pocket. There were probably financing costs. There were a number of other hidden variables behind these hidden costs that would hurt the customer even more, and it was entirely due to bad logistics decisions. Now, our third case I refer to as flying cheese, and we had a scenario where our client had their competitor in the Japanese market for Parmesan cheese withdraw their product and get out of that category. Our customer, being the world's number 2 food business, wanted to meet the excess demand that would create and grow their market share and really increase their lead as the number 1 supplier of that product in their market. This is really a textbook scenario for the strategic value of air freight in a supply chain. You've got a need spotted to grow market share and increase sales. It's been looked at by a local market manager who's probably referred it up to a country manager, maybe even a regional head. The expenses have been signed off probably at the CFO level for the division, the region, or maybe even for the whole company. Production planning is involved, logistics and supply chain is involved. So you have about a good 7 or 10 stakeholders watching this and committed to solving this issue of increasing market share and meeting an emergency in the supply in the market using air freight in the supply chain. This is the kind of scenario where air freight just has no match. It is really the best solution for this type of problem. Now, the customer invited Crescent to bid on the project. This was an early stage of our relationship with them, and our bid was accepted on the basis of low price, as our rates were 20 cents per kilo lower than their existing in-house global freight forwarder. Two very interesting points here. Number one, remember, we won here because of low price. In the previous couple of examples, you may have come to the conclusion that we were trying to steer you towards believing that you always had to pay top dollar or you always had to pay more. That's not always the case. It's a value proposition, not just a price proposition that determines cost. The other thing that is interesting here is that we were able to beat out a global forwarder, a company so big they have their own airplanes, they fly all over the world, and a lot of people, especially as you move higher up in the organizations, in the director of finance level, director of supply chain, director of customer service, and so on, believe that a large service provider is automatically going to be cheaper because they have bigger purchasing power. And on large business, high tonnage business, the spot markets and the pricing and the procurement model that a small forwarder brings to the table neutralizes that advantage and makes them every bit as competitive as a large company can be on big shipments. Our advantage was in our procurement process. Rather than focusing on one airline for this key trade lane, Chicago to Tokyo, we kept on and we keep on developing relationships with multiple high-quality carriers, which includes low-price participants. Utilizing a high level of market knowledge and insight, Crescent was able to establish a handling plan for this project using a low-price carrier. This is very important. We have bridged the gap between low price and premium service in this case. Based on input from the shipper, we created specific loading, price, and transit protocols for the low price carrier to adhere to. So we didn't just throw the freight at the cheapest guy and let him figure it out. We went back to the manufacturer, got production schedules, plans, factory closures, so on, all the relevant details we needed to know. And then we turned over to our vendor, the low price carrier, and we told them, this is the day you're going to get your freight. This is the flight you're going to get on. This is the arrival date that we need and time we need in Japan in order for the customer to get their goods on time. We planned each booking. We planned every step of the process with the shipper and the vendor and introduced a complete level of transparency, and that was how the low price carrier got it right. Accountability was the actual value add that Crescent brought to the project, and that is what made low price effective. We gave them our terms, we told them what needed to be done, and we invested that time in making sure they were capable, and that made the process go right. And that's how you achieve success with low price. You have to add value as a service provider on top of the low price solution. Now, looking at the protocols and how this project was executed, all the shipments were trucked from Schofield, Wisconsin down to Chicago and flown to Tokyo on time. The volumes were large because, remember, these were ocean freight orders normally that were now being converted to air. So these normally would fit into a 40-foot container of ocean freight. The other major issue that we encountered and had to prepare for were fluctuations in the volume. Those of you who are in manufacturing are aware that during certain times of the year and at year end, there are factory closures for retooling, renovation, and the holidays. And in order to meet the demand, the factories were producing in some weeks the equivalent of 3 and 4 weeks worth of product just to have it ready so that the factory could close and there would be no interruption in supply. As a result, we had to set up a process that would ramp up and down. We had loads ranging from 11 tons in a normal week all the way up to 63 tons in a peak load period because the factory combined about 3 or 4 weeks worth of production into one shipment and just told us to come get it. And despite those fluctuations and despite the changes in the schedules, we were able to pick up all of that product and get it out on time entirely because of proper planning, and that is one of the core elements of the service benefit. Taking a look at the numbers in this case, you can see our competitor's quote was $1.35 a kilo on 128 tons. They offered to do the project for $172,800. Crescent came in at $1.15 a kilo, so we offered to and did the project at $147,200, resulting in a net savings to our client of $25,600. Looking at the numbers and beyond on this case, the number one objective of satisfying the customer's goal of increasing market share through expedited supply was satisfied. This is huge, and this is one of those points that distinguishes the large logistics provider and freight forwarder from the small freight forwarder and logistics provider. The larger competitors in this industry are built by design to take in as much freight as they can, drive down the cost through procurement, and satisfy those objectives. The smaller provider is by default set up to retain your business, to look for the right combination of price and service that meets your business needs so that they can keep servicing your business over time. We're going to detail that concept in a future webinar a little bit more, but it is significant. In terms of the hidden costs of bad logistics, there are none in this case. The project went right at budget and no overruns or any problems. Direct gain of good logistics planning. You can book it if you wanted to in accounting terminology. You have a $25,600 savings of shipping costs, confirmed and billed and done. There's also, again, the benefit of increased market share. That's why the customers set out on this project, and that's what they achieved. They also, as a result, increased their sales in that market, increased cash flow, and long-term profitability. So air freight was the mode to realize business growth. There was actually an investment in air freight here. There was an increase in supply. There was an increase in sales and marketing effort at destination. The bridge that made it possible was air freight. And this is why when we talk to customers, we usually talk to them about their investment in logistics rather than their logistics spend or logistics expense or cost. In conclusion, excellent service is not a commodity. It's not on a checklist of deliverables. Furthermore, price does not equal cost. And this is a key idea behind this webinar. Price is a component of cost, and they are not interchangeable. In this webinar, we've shown you several instances where costs were adversely affected by decisions that were based solely on price. Low price is not bad, but generally it's insufficient to meet business needs. There have to be service components in place to support the objective of the customer in pursuit of a goal. Service components beyond pleasantries or 24/7 access are not enough. Now, what am I talking about there? We'd love to know about your daughter's volleyball tournament. It's a great rapport to have with your client. We'd love to know about your son's baseball game. It's a great relationship to have. But that is not service. Even us simply memorizing the consignee of your freight so that we can make the same booking over and over again, that too is not enough to say that we have a superior service. A lot of that is just pleasantries. Same thing with 24/7 access. A lot of owners will boast about being available to their clients 24/7. Guess what? Your clients don't want to reach you 24/7, and we understand that. We know that our logistics buyers don't want to be worried about their freight at 2 in the morning. They don't want to talk to us about it at 2 in the morning. They want to go to bed at their regular time, knowing that everything is well addressed ahead of time. Service elements of market knowledge, planning, and transparency make this happen. They are necessary to realize a true low-cost solution, and that's what we've demonstrated in this webinar. If your service provider knows their market and knows your customer base and your objectives as a client, they will be able to deliver a true low-cost solution over and over again. The service benefit will be further defined in our next webinar on the role of small logistics providers. I gave you a little bit of insight into where we're headed with that. We're going to explain that difference in business models and what it means for your business in greater detail coming up in the next webinar. It is detailed and open for discussion in the Exporting Excellence blog. You can reach the blog through the link on this slide, or you can come to our website at crescent1.com and click on blog. We look forward to your comments and continuing the discussion over there. And of course, the service benefit is practiced daily at crescent1.com by Crescent Air Freight. And we look forward to supporting you and your international business with our service benefit program and the various low-cost, true low-cost solutions that we believe we can bring to you. Once again, I want to thank you for downloading and watching our webinar. We will let you know when part 2 is available, and I wish you continued success in your international business.